Hello, dear friends. It is my pleasure to continue together with you our study on chapter 15 of the book of Revelation. I would like to tackle the last verse, verse 8, which I invite you to read with me now. The temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from His power, and no one was able to enter the temple till the seventh plague of the seven angels were completed. This cloud filling the temple is the presence of God. The text is quite clear. During the inauguration of the temple in the Old Testament, whether it be the temple in the desert or the temple of Solomon, it was the same. God revealed His presence at the inauguration of the temple. I invite you to read some passages, especially in the book of Exodus, chapter 40, verses 34 to 38. Then the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tabernacle of meeting because the cloud rested above it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, the children of Israel would go onward in all their journeys. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not journey till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was above the tabernacle by day, and fire was over it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. So this cloud that accompanied all the children of God, all the people of Israel during all their journey in the desert, it was the same that was manifested in the temple inside at the inauguration. When David prepared the temple that Solomon built, we find the same thing happening. May I invite you to read in 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 10 and 11? And it came to pass, when the priests came out of the holy place, that the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priest could not continue ministering because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. The same thing is said in the second book of Chronicles, chapter 5, verse 14. So that the priest could not continue ministering because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of God. We also find the same event about the temple that has never existed but was described at length in Ezekiel. Ezekiel, in one of his visions, sees the glory of the Lord and describes the same thing. We find this in chapter 10 of the book of the prophet Ezekiel, verses 3 and 4. Now, the cherubim were standing on the south side of the temple when the man went in, and the cloud filled the inner court. Then the glory of the Lord went up from the cherub and posed over the threshold of the temple, and the house was filled with the cloud, and the court was full of brightness of the Lord's glory. The same is reported in the vision of the prophet Isaiah, when he sees God and His train filling the temple. Let's read it in the 6th chapter of the book of the prophet Isaiah, verses 3 and 4. And one cried to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of His glory. And the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. It is the presence of God that fills the house with smoke. Actually, the cloud hides man from the presence of God, and it is necessary to hide the presence of God to man, because man would not be able to bear the presence of God. So, if we come back to that cloud in the wilderness, we see that God's people was protected, was illuminated by it. And the cloud which accompanied the people of God was actually Jesus. This is what Apostle Paul says in the first epistle to the Corinthians, chapter 10, verses 1 to 4. Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Thus, Christ is omnipresent in the Old Testament and is always present to uphold the people of God in his wanderings. Then, the cloud could have a favorable or unfavorable aspect. It looked either like a cloud or had the appearance of fire, and a cloud hid the fire. Don't we say that there is no smoke without fire? In fact, smoke hides the fire. But if in the distance you see some smoke, you may say, there is a fire somewhere. The cloud therefore reveals the fire, at the same time hides it. May I invite you to see together how this cloud intervened, especially during the crossing of the Red Sea by the Israelites? We find this in the book of Exodus, chapter 14, verses 19 and 20. And the angel of God, who went before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud went from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus, it was a cloud and darkness to the one, and it gave light by night to the other, so that the one did not come near the other all that night. This text tells us that the angel of the Lord, we now understand that it is Jesus who stands between the two camps. But this cloud has actually a bright side. It illuminates the night for the children of Israel, but on the other side, it is darkness for the Egyptians. And Jesus would do more. If we go down to verses 24-25, we see how God intervened. Now, it came to pass in the morning watch that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and he troubled the army of the Egyptians. And he took off their chariot wheels, so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." Even the Egyptians realized what was happening. Jesus was in the cloud. And now, I'd like to draw your attention to another cloud, one that occurred when the high priest officiated, and especially when he was ministering during the Day of Atonement, the Yom Kippur, the Day of Great Forgiveness, the only day of the year when he entered the most holy place. Here's how this ceremony is described unto us in Leviticus 16, verse 2. And the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron your brother not to come at just any time into the holy place inside the veil, before the mercy seat which is on the ark, lest he die. For I will appear in the cloud above the mercy seat." A little further, verses 12 and 13, we read, Then he shall take a censer full of burning coals of fire from the altar before the Lord, with his handful of sweet incense beaten fine, and bring it inside the veil. And he shall put the incense on the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of incense may cover the mercy seat that is on the testimony, lest he die. The description of this ceremony is extremely interesting. Indeed, the high priest was to take a censer, and in this censer he had to take burning coals from off the altar of God. He put some in the censer and threw in 2 handfuls of sweet incense. It gave off a cloud around him. And it is thus, surrounded by this cloud that represented the grace of Jesus, that he could be present in the most holy place before the Lord. So, he entered the most holy place only after a preparation of 10 days, and the text gives us an extremely accurate detail. The cloud that emanated from the censer went up on the mercy seat. In other words, it met with this other cloud that came out from above the mercy seat between the 2 cherubim. This was the cloud revealing the presence of God. I invite you to read this in the book of Exodus, chapter 25, verse 22. And there, I will meet with you, and I will speak with you from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim which are on the ark of the testimony, about everything which I will give you in commandment to the children of Israel. This cloud is not named in the Bible, but the Jews call it Shekinah. It was a kind of bright cloud which represented the presence of God Himself. Can you imagine that extraordinary experience that the priest, the high priest, was brought to live on that day? He would enter the same cloud as God. And this because he himself was clothed with a cloud. This cloud was none other than Christ. It symbolized Christ. Christ's role is to hide man in order to be able to present him to God. But the role of Christ is also to veil God in order to make him known to man. Indeed, the role of Christ on this earth was to reveal God. We have lost the idea of God. We have made a false image of God. And Christ's role, one of his tasks in coming to this earth, was to reveal the true image of God. I invite you to read in the Gospel of John chapter 1 what John told us about it. John chapter 1 verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And the Word became flesh. Indeed, it is Jesus. He became flesh. Why? To reveal his Father. And we behold his glory, says the text, as of the only begotten of the Father. But wasn't the cloud in the desert already the glory of God? Let's go to verse 18 of chapter 1 of Gospel of John. John 1:18. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. This is the glory of Christ, to have made known God. So, we have through the symbol of the cloud such an extraordinary richness. A richness that shows us that the cloud both hides and reveals. It hides man to present him to God. It veils God to reveal him to man. And that's what the high priest was living, being united to God through the cloud that covered them both by the melting of these two clouds. And that's what John proposes us to understand when he brings to us Jesus' word in chapter 17, which I invite you to read with me in the Gospel of John chapter 17. Verses 20 to 23. I do not pray for these alone, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that they all may be one as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. And the glory which you gave me, I have given them, that they may be one just as we are one. I in them and you in me, that they may be made perfect in one, and that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them as you have loved me. Is this not the most amazing thing that could ever happen to us? To be one with Christ, to be one with God, to be completely in the love of God, to reflect His character. This is what God calls us to. And it's such an extraordinary destiny that we still cannot believe it yet. But that's what He offers us.